Hey everyone, Sean Worcester here with another episode of Moon Series coverage here in the VGC Hub. As promised, in this video we're going to take a look at the Toronto Regional Championships results and discuss them a little bit in preparation for the upcoming Greensboro Regional Championships. In this video you'll hear me talk about the Toronto Regionals and the teams that did well. I want to look at some Pokemon that could possibly be used as checks or counters to the teams that did well, and I also want to throw out some recommendations and some last minute techs that you should either be thinking about using in Greensboro or things that you should be testing against in your preparation. So a little bit about this event. In terms of a regionals, it was a little bit of a smaller one. Only 85 players actually sat down to play round one. But that being said, a lot of the world's top players were in attendance, and it was a very top-heavy event. When I say the world's top players, I really do mean players from around the world. It featured players from the United States, Canada, Italy, and even China. After the Swiss rounds concluded, these players were left to play out top 8, and this is a really stacked top cut. A lot of the players here have been in top cut at previous events. Some of them have been in top cut several times before, so there was definitely a lot of high level play that happened at this tournament. So drawing your attention now to the top 8 teams from this event, I want to talk about a point I brought up at the end of our last video. I talked about why you should not be focused on hard countering just 1 or 2 archetypes if you're going to a large event, and this tournament really displays why. On top of being a stacked event in terms of the player quality, it was by far the most diverse top 8 we've had at a regional this season. The top 8 featured 7 different restricted duos and a couple of Pokemon, both restricted and non-restricted, that we haven't featured in a regional top cut this season. Unfortunately, there wasn't a stream for the VGC part of this tournament, so a lot of these Pokemon sets and the specifics on their moves and EVs have remained hidden. We don't really know what these Pokemon were trained to do, we just know that they were present in the top 8. So now that we've looked at the top 8 teams from this tournament, I want to look at a couple of Pokemon that performed really well and talk about how you might look to counter these Pokemon if you're going to Greensboro. The first one that I want to talk about is Volcarona. Volcarona has now cut each of the last 3 large events in a row, and it's firmly established itself as a popular non-restricted Pokemon, so your team really needs to have a game plan against it. Water types seem like an obvious check. Pokemon like Kyogre can threaten big damage on Volcarona, but if Volcarona is paired next to a Groudon, which it is really common to do, the water types will actually have their damage weakened, and they might not be able to handle the Volcarona immediately. A lot of teams use a couple of flying types to handle the Volcarona a little more easily. Tornadus is really popular on Kyogre teams, and Talonflame is really popular on Groudon teams. Both of these Pokemon commonly carry the Flying Z Crystal, which will usually one-shot the Volcarona, and given how fast both of these Pokemon are, they'll usually KO the Volcarona before it gets a chance to launch an attack off. In addition, since both of these Pokemon are usually faster than your teammate, if Volcarona tries to Rage Powder your teammate away, your flying type will be able to KO the Volcarona, and then your teammate will be able to freely attack the other slot. A more unorthodox way I've seen teams try to handle Volcarona is with their own Incineroar. Something I've seen people do is they'll lead a really threatening restricted legend like Groudon or Xerneas, and then as the Volcarona tries to Z-move into that slot, they'll just switch their restricted out for the Incineroar and try to take a resisted hit. This way you're kind of baiting the Z-move out and trying to waste it. If you don't end up baiting the Z-move out, it's still not a bad thing. Incineroar can follow up on the next turn with a Fake Out and make the Volcarona flinch, and if you have Snarl on your Incineroar, you can actually lower its special attack and weaken the Volcarona that way. Another thing I want to highlight from this top 8 is that Alex Underhill has now cut 2 events in a row with the same exact 6 Pokemon and his hard Trick Room team. You are going to need to bring your Trick Room counters to Greensboro. Taunt and Roar are 2 moves that can both delay Trick Room from going up, but this strategy also has its weaknesses. If you taunt a Lunala and they decide to read this and fire off a Z move, it's not unrealistic for you to start the game down a Pokemon. Roar, of course, also doesn't work if the Trick Room setter is the last thing that they have. Intimidate and Fake Out are both great ways to stall out Trick Room turns. Incineroar carries both of these, and Landorus T has Intimidate and also threatens 4 times super effective damage on the Stakataka. Both of these Pokemon also conveniently have access to U-turn, which allows you to eat a hit and then pivot into a Pokemon that's more equipped to handle the opponent. Navigating into a board position where you can double protect is also a good idea. This will immediately burn a full turn of Trick Room and you won't take any damage in the process. Most Trick Room teams also don't carry a setup Pokemon like Geomancy Xerneas, so it's really hard for them to take advantage of passive plays like this. Amoonguss also gets a special mention here. It's one of the slowest Pokemon in the format at base 30 speed, so once Trick Room is set up, it becomes one of the fastest. It can threaten to Spore and put your opponent's biggest threats to sleep, or it will force them to switch out. Either way is a great way to push their Trick Room plans back a turn. Amoonguss can also use Rage Powder, which allows you to keep a faster, harder hitting Pokemon on the field while you redirect attacks away from it and keep it safe. Solgaleo Zygarde is another restricted duo that has cut 2 events in a row now, with a third one that came just short in Dallas. At the beginning of the format, this was thought of as more of a joke team, but it's proven to be a lot more troublesome than that. As far as restricted Pokemon go, Groudon is probably one of the better answers to Solgaleo. It's very sturdy on the physically defensive side, but it needs to be pretty careful. Zygarde boosts its defense with Coil, and if you let it get too far set up, Groudon won't be able to touch it. Running a partner that can answer this like Xerneas or Haze Tapu Fini is a great way to answer this combination. Xerneas Lunala teams are another duo that can function reasonably well against this team. Solgaleo is usually threatened pretty hard by the Lunala because of its signature Z move. As a result, Xerneas is usually pretty safe and can set up Geomancy a little more freely. If Lunala manages to psych up the Xerneas' boosts, it can actually often handle both of the threats on its own. Just beware of an opposing Haze Tapu Fini, potentially erasing your Xerneas' Geomancy boosts. With any team you're running, threatening the Tapu Fini is critical against this team. Tapu Fini either stalls out your ability to KO their restricted Pokemon by using Heal Pulse, or it significantly advances their own setup by using Swagger. If you manage to KO or scare away the Fini, you'll be able to slow down the Zygarde's plan and buy yourself a little more time to find a reasonable answer. An example of this might be using Kartana to threaten the Tapu Fini and force it out, while you have an Ice Beam Kyogre waiting in the back to threaten the Zygarde. The last part of this video I have split up into 2 different sections. In the first one, I want to talk about a couple of restricted duos that you could either be testing out or testing against in your preparation for Greensboro. And then in the last part, I talk about some non-restricted slots that you could potentially be testing out if you don't want to switch up the entire restricted combination of your teams. In a metagame this diverse, I like to find teams that have even or close to even matchups against as many different combinations as possible. For this reason, Xerneas is usually held in really high regard because of its consistency in setting up Geomancy and its ability to sweep through. So the first restricted duo I want to talk about is Xerneas Groudon. With their more recent additions of Talonflame and Volcarona, Xerneas Groudon teams can execute their game plans very consistently, and consistency is key in large events like regionals. There's some type overlap between Groudon, Incineroar, and the second fire type slot, which opens the floor up for some cool tech options that other teams might not be able to use. For example, you might not really need Fire Punch on a Groudon when you've got an Incineroar and a Talonflame in the back. You have the ability to use something like Stone Edge or Rock Tomb instead and shore up a Ho-Oh matchup that would otherwise be really bad. Also, between Fake Out on Incineroar, Rage Powder on the Volcarona, and Tailwind on both the Volcarona and the Talonflame, it's really easy for the Xerneas to find a turn to set Geomancy up. This team also doesn't have any dead weight or passive Pokemon that get stuck on the field without doing too much. Every Pokemon threatens at least some degree of damage against the opposing team. The next duo I want to talk about is another Xerneas core, this time paired with Kyogre. This core is also known as the Reindeer core, and it operates pretty consistently against a large variety of teams. Kind of similar to the Xerneas Groudon teams, it's not very difficult to find a spot to Geomancy because you have Rage Powder, Tailwind, and Fake Out all included on the same team. There are 2 very different playstyles of this team as well, and it forces your opponent into a guessing game in the early parts of best of 3. There are going to be times where they don't know if you're running the Choice Scarf Kyogre or the Z Psych Up Kyogre, and they might not cover the correct option. This team also usually relies on moves that are accurate. Attacks like Kyogre's Water Spout, Xerneas' moves, Kartana's moves, and Amoonguss' Spore are all 100% accurate, and minimizing any kind of randomness goes a long way in making sure you stay up at the top tables. This last duo I only want to talk about briefly because it was covered in our last video as well. It's the Groudon Lunala Hard Trick Room Core. This team got second place in Collinsville, and it's followed up with another strong top 4 finish in Toronto. Lunala's immunity to Fake Out and big damage output makes it a very strong Trick Room setter. Not only is it able to survive hits and set up Trick Room multiple times in a game, but the Z Crystal makes sure it has a very strong offensive presence at all times. Alex Underhill's team also uses unique techs that can set up 100% win conditions, which is something that's very rare in VGC. His Serena ran Feint, which breaks through Protect and guarantees that one specific Pokemon that you want from your opponent's team is going to take damage this turn. His Tapu Fini also ran Gravity, which makes moves like Groudon's Precipice Blades more accurate, and it also makes Precipice Blades hit flying types. Being able to set 100% win conditions like this is pretty rare in VGC, and it's not something that should be taken for granted over the course of several Swiss rounds. In this last section, I want to talk about a couple of non-restricted Pokemon that can be teched onto your teams. Not everybody is going to want to completely change their restricted core at the last minute, and in some cases you might have already found 3, 4, or even 5 Pokemon that work really well together, and you just need to figure out the last one to shore up some matchups. These next couple of Pokemon are non-restricteds that can function as very useful techs for multiple different archetypes. Serena is the first non-restricted Pokemon that I want to talk about. It's kind of quietly netted itself at least one spot in every single regional level top 8 this far, with multiple Serena being featured in Top Cut at 3 out of the 4 events. Serena made Top Cut in Toronto on 4 different teams, both Kyogre and Groudon based teams. Serena offers resistance to both Kyogre's Water Spout and Groudon's Precipice Blades, and it can take both of these hits well while potentially U-turning out, allowing one of your Pokemon to switch in for free. Serena also keeps true to the theme of consistency being key. Its Queenly Majesty ability allows you to protect your partner from priority moves like Fake Out or Prankster Taunt, guaranteeing that they will get a chance to fire an attack off in certain situations. Along this line of thought, Serena also learns Feint, which we just talked about. It breaks through Protect as well as Wide Guard, allowing you to guarantee that certain Pokemon on your opponent's side will take the attacks you need them to. Crobat is the next Pokemon I want to talk about. It placed top 8 back at the Dallas Regional Championships, specifically on a Lunala Xerneas team, but Crobat has also done well with Groudon teams in the past. Crobat has several really unique supporting moves, including Super Fang, Haze, Taunt, Tailwind, and Quick Guard. Its Inner Focus ability makes it one of the few Pokemon that can actually stop something like Lunala from setting up a Trick Room. You can't use Fake Out to prevent it from firing off a Taunt. Haze combined with Inner Focus also makes it one of the stronger Xerneas checks in this metagame. If it sets up a Tailwind, it will outspeed a Xerneas even after it's used Geomancy, and its typing allows it to survive one Moonblast even after Xerneas is boosted. Haze also won't be blocked if Xerneas is attempting to protect. As an Island Guardian, Tapu Koko is a non-restricted Pokemon that's talked about a little more than the other ones. It's seen a moderate amount of success throughout Moon Series with top 8s at several different events. It's also viable on several different team archetypes and has seen success paired with Xerneas Groudon, Lunala Xerneas, Kyogre Ho-Oh, and Kyogre Lunala. Tapu Koko has several viable sets depending on what your team specifically needs. It can hold a Focus Sash or an Electrium Z if you need it to be a powerful offensive presence. It can use Assault Vest if you need it to play a more supportive and tanky role, and it's also been used with all 3 of the various choice items. Electric Terrain also prevents your grounded Pokemon from falling asleep, giving you a much easier time against Pokemon like Smeargle or Amoonguss. Gengar is the last non-restricted Pokemon I wanted to talk about. It was featured on Nick Navarre's top 8 Xerneas Groudon team. Gengar is usually a pretty aggressive Pokemon in this format, especially as a lead Pokemon. It can usually be seen holding either a Focus Sash or the Ghost Z Crystal. As a ghost type, Gengar is immune to Fake Out, which means it can also use Ghostium Z or Taunt to prevent Lunala from setting up a Trick Room. Because of its unique Ghost Poison typing, Gengar often pressures opponents for large amounts of damage offensively and scares them away from setting up with Pokemon like Xerneas or Lunala. Gengar also has a small but really unique move pool for support. It has access to Taunt, Icy Wind, and Disable. Even before using Icy Wind, Gengar's speed makes it faster than several common threats like Xerneas, Kartana, and Tapu Lele. That's all for this week's episode. Thanks again to everyone for tuning in. I've linked to the Trainer Tower event results section in the description below. There you can find the results of Toronto Regionals as well as several other large events. I'm also linking to the Smogon VGC Forums section. Blake has been working really hard to revamp this part of the Smogon Forums, so I definitely want to make people aware of its usefulness both as a resource and as a place to talk with other VGC players. Greensboro Regionals closes out the large event circuit for Moon Series. We might post a wrap-up video, but otherwise you can be on the lookout for Ultra Series content starting as soon as the Greensboro Regionals is complete. One more thing I wanted to talk about, here on the VGC Hub, we will always provide coverage for tournament results, forecasting, and metagame update videos. I was wondering if there's any other kinds of content you would like to see us do in addition to this. Other content can be great to fill the space between large events when the metagame isn't evolving as quickly, so let us know what you would like to see in the comments below. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you all at the next episode for the beginning of Ultra Series.